we're investigating the murder of Tommy Ballard that could potentially be related to this case. We are waiting for testing to come back on the firearm we believe was used to murder Tommy Ballard, a firearm that we purchased from Nicholas Houck, who was using a fake name when he sold the rifle. We know it's the same caliber. There's 5 criteria that they're looking at, and so far it's matched 4 of the 5 criteria.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of Crime Story Sunday. Last week, in episode 29, was actually part 1 of a 2-part series, and here is part 2. There's an evil in Bardstown, and its name is Houck. Now, last week we talked about the murder of Crystal Rogers. Crystal Rogers was the 35-year-old mother of 5 who was murdered on the 3rd of July 2015. Very recently, after 8 years, her then boyfriend, the father of her 5th child, 2.5-year-old Eli, at the time of Crystal's murder, Brooks Houck, was arrested. Finally, I hear you all say. Brooks Houck has been the only suspect in the disappearance and now we know the murder of Crystal Rogers. Now, her body has never been found, so this is going to be a no-body homicide case. Maybe that's part of the reason why it's taken them 8 years to get to this point. Based on all the information that we've got to date, I think they've got the right man in jail. Now, he's in jail on a $10 million bond, and he has applied to have that bond reduced, but he's a very rich man, and the judge, thankfully, has denied the application for bond reduction. So Brooks is still in jail, and hopefully he's going to get used to life behind bars. In this episode, though, we are going to talk about 3 other cases, 4 other murders that have taken place in Bardstown over the last decade. Bardstown is just a little town in Kentucky, and it's had a great deal of pain and hurt and scrutiny over the last decade. And much of that pain and hurt has focused around the Ballard family. Crystal's parents, Tommy and Sherry Ballard, have never given up hope of finding out what happened to their daughter Crystal. It's perhaps his zeal and just his fervour for finding out what happened to his daughter that resulted in Tommy Ballard losing his life. So the first case we're going to talk about in this episode is the murder of Tommy Ballard. Tommy was the owner of a construction company. He had a strong faith. He was a member of St. Thomas's Catholic Church. Tommy was happily married to Sherry, and they had 2 daughters and a son. One of the daughters, of course, being Crystal. And they had 8 grandchildren. Coming just 16 months after the disappearance of Crystal, Tommy's death shocked Bardstown. This is a small town. Everybody knows everybody else. It's that kind of town. So the Ballard's pain at losing Crystal was everybody's pain. But at the time Tommy was murdered, in November 2016, in the 3 years previous, there'd been 2 other horrendous murders. The double homicide of Kathy and Samantha Netherland in April 2014, and the shooting to death of police officer and father Jason Ellis in May 2013. When I said that Bardstown has had just more than its fair share of hurt in the last decade, that is not hyperbole. It really isn't. But what happened to Tommy Ballard? Well, his case is still unsolved, so we don't really know. I've got to tell you that it's speculation that perhaps Tommy was getting too close to the truth about what happened to his daughter Crystal, and his life had to be ended because of it. That's just my opinion, but I think it's the opinion of a lot of people. And in court at Brooks's bond hearing recently, the prosecutor let out something that I think we all wanted to know, that there could indeed be a link between the disappearance and murder of Crystal Rogers and the murder of her father Tommy. The prosecutor is perhaps getting at that the gun used to shoot Tommy Ballard was perhaps owned by Brooks Houck's brother, then a serving police officer, Nick Houck. Actually, by the time Tommy was murdered, he'd been fired. At the time Crystal disappeared, he was a serving police officer. You know, at the time when he was really arrogant in his police interviews, when he failed a polygraph and was just really shitty about it. Yeah, he was a serving police officer at the time. Yeah, we talked about all of that last week. But this is about Tommy, and this is what happened. On November 19th, 2016, Tommy had plans to go hunting on his property with his grandson, who I believe was like 10 or 11 at the time. So it was very early morning. It was before 8 a.m. Police were called to the 1400 block of Ed Brent Road for a death investigation. Tommy had been shot clean in the chest from a distance. You know, somebody hadn't come up to him in a mask and shot him. This was from a distance. So this is somebody who really knows how to shoot. Tommy and his grandson were out there to start their morning of hunting, and a shot rang out and Tommy fell to the floor. Now, they did look at Tommy's grandson, thinking that it might be that the little boy had discharged a firearm accidentally. But no, Tommy had not done this to himself. The little boy had not shot his grandpa by accident. The firearm that they had with them had not been fired that day. So this was a cold and calculated murder by somebody who was lying in wait. So it had to be somebody who knew where Tommy was going to be that day, or at least had a good idea of where Tommy was going to be that day. But it's strange, you know, because Tommy reported to his wife Sherry a few months before that he felt like someone was following him. Quote, "I actually told from the very beginning that it was no accident," Sherry Ballard said. Sherry mentions that she believes that Tommy was getting too close to information about who may be responsible for Crystal's disappearance. But the case remains unsolved. Perhaps now, with the arrest of Brooks Houck and potentially a co-conspirator, Joseph Lawson, we're going to find some answers. This is the FBI's information page about Tommy Ballard. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $10,000 for information leading to the identification, arrest and conviction of the individual or individuals responsible for the homicide of Tommy Ballard. After his daughter Crystal Rogers disappeared in July 2015, Tommy Ballard created Team Crystal, a group of Bardstown, Kentucky community members dedicated to finding Crystal and bringing her home. It's interesting that the FBI have that detail in there, isn't it? On the morning of November 19th, 2016, 16 months after Crystal's disappearance, Ballard was preparing for a hunting trip with his 12-year-old grandson on family property next to Bluegrass Parkway in Bardstown, Kentucky. An unknown subject fired one shot and hit Ballard in the chest and instantly killed him. If you have information relating to this homicide, please call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You may also contact your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. Was Tommy Ballard getting too close? Was it indeed Nick's gun that was used to kill Tommy Ballard? If so, that begs the question, who was the shooter? Was it Nick Houck? Was it one of the Houck associates? Somebody out there knows. But if it was Nick's gun, and it wasn't Nick who was the shooter, well, how did that person acquire Nick's gun? You know, the very gun that an undercover cop was able to buy off Nick Houck. Time will tell. And I think we will get answers in Tommy's case. I'm quietly confident now Brooks Houck's in jail that Tommy Ballard's murder will now be solved. We may also see a solution to the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland and Jason Ellis. You know, we've seen this in South Carolina, haven't we? With the arrest and conviction of Alec Murdaugh. That, you know, a great family with a lot of power in the local community, you know, big fishes in a small pond. You know, once you start to dismantle that web that they've managed to twist around the community, once you pull one thread and it starts to unravel, then lots of skeletons fall out the closet. After the conviction of Alec Murdaugh, we've seen the reopening, or the reinvigoration at least, of the case of Stephen Smith, you know, which has now been ruled a homicide instead of an accident. A new autopsy has been conducted. And finally, maybe Stephen's family will get answers as to what happened to him. And I get the same vibe. It's going to start now happening in Bardstown. Now the Houcks have been taken down a peg or two, that we're going to see some answers, that we're going to see some unravelling of the web that the Houck family have spun there in Bardstown, Kentucky. But these two ladies here are Kathy and Samantha Netherland, and they're perhaps the least well-known of the 5 people who were murdered in Bardstown over the last decade. And this is an absolutely horrendous story, brutal against a teacher and her 16-year-old daughter. Now, this happened on April 22nd, 2014. 48-year-old Kathy Netherland and 16-year-old Samantha were found brutally murdered inside their home. They were found by Kathy's dad, Norris Harding. Just put yourself in Norris's shoes for a second if you can. This just is appalling. This is appalling. But anyway, Norris went round to the house after he was notified that uncharacteristically Kathy had not shown up for work. And when Norris arrived at the home, he peered through the window and he saw Kathy on the floor in the dining room. He ran round the back and he saw Samantha as well. Dead, murdered, blood everywhere. Cops were called and their bodies were just in horrific condition. Autopsy confirmed that Kathy died from several gunshot wounds, whereas Samantha, she'd been tortured, she'd been bludgeoned and then stabbed to death, and her throat slit. Those who knew Kathy and Samantha just cannot to this day get their head round who would want to murder them. Kathy Netherland, a middle-aged special ed teacher, and the beautifully bright, bubbly, vivacious Samantha, who had her whole life ahead of her. You know, she was smart, she had friends, she was kind, she was studious, she sang in her high school choir, she was looking forward to attending the junior prom with her first boyfriend, she was looking forward to going to college. Just life's snuffed out. For what reason? And the Netherland family were just coming to terms with the loss of Kathy's husband, who less than a year earlier died from colon cancer, which left the eldest Netherland daughter, Holly, without a mother, a father, a sister. One of the early theories was that perhaps Holly had something to do with this murder. It's true, obviously, that detectives and social media sleuths alike first look at those closest to the family. It's not unusual. And as Kathy's husband, Bob, had died already of colon cancer, well, couldn't be him. Kathy had not begun to date anyone new since her husband's death. Samantha's boyfriend was in high school and he was cleared. He was cleared of any suspicion. So eyes were on Holly. After Bob passed away, Kathy raised her life insurance so that both Holly and Samantha would be covered if something happened to her. And as is often with mothers and daughters, sometimes Holly and Kathy's relationship could be a bit volatile. Listen, you should hear some of the arguments me and my mother have had over the years. You know, look, if something happened to my mother, all eyes would be on me. They'd be like, go and see Michelle, she... Do you know what I mean? It's a thing. But just days before the murder, unfortunately for Holly, she tweeted, "Your words went way too far this time. You'll be lucky if I decide to come home." Now, she wasn't to know that just 2 days later, her mother and her sister would be brutally murdered. But it kind of doesn't look good, does it? But there's no known evidence that Holly's volatile relationship with her mother were nothing more than typical troubles that every family has. And according to Kathy's sister, Stacey Hibbard, Holly was actually unaware that Kathy had raised her life insurance policy prior to her death. Which, if Holly had anything to do with it, it rules out money being a motive. And just the horrific nature of these murders, just the torture that Kathy and Samantha had gone through, and just some of the details, you know, around this murder, for me, and also I think for law enforcement as well, it rules out Holly. I'd be incredibly surprised if it came out at some point in the future that Holly had something to do with it, that Holly was involved in some way. Stacey Hibbard told reporters that Holly had been ruled out as a suspect, but police have not confirmed this. When asked for comment, police said, "We're not going to say whether there's any potential suspects or we've ruled anybody out. Everybody continues to remain a possible suspect." However, there's a potential gang involvement that we could talk about. Now, this is getting into the realms of speculation, but let's do it. In 2018, reports began to surface about the murders of Kathy and Samantha being possibly gang-related. Now, not that Kathy or Samantha were in a gang. Something maybe about a gang initiation. A docuseries about the disappearance and murder of Crystal Rogers happened. And this series also looked into the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland. During the finale, Stephanie Bauer spoke to an anonymous inmate. Now, it's an inmate, so do they have a vested interest in telling porky pies? I don't know. Anyway, this inmate said to Stephanie Bauer, the murders of Kathy and Samantha were part of a gang initiation. While Kathy and Samantha themselves did not have any known connection to gangs, the anonymous inmate claimed that they were killed by people being initiated. When Stephanie Bauer asked how he knew that it was an initiation, he said that a cell phone jammer was placed by the Netherlands front door to kill all the cell phone signals to the house. And, quote, "I know they were tortured. I know that they were tied to their chairs. I know that one of them had her throat slit. They were stabbed and one was shot. I know that trinkets were taken as trophies." Now, we do know some of the details of the crime scene, but whether this inmate was able to give more information about that crime scene than has been made public, I'm not sure. Look, I'd be looking at that inmate very closely if he knew more about the crime scene than has ever been made public. That inmate himself would be on my list. But it could well be that people talk, don't they? But investigators have never confirmed that these murders have got anything to do with gang initiation. It's just a theory. But there is one thing for certain about this case, and that is this black Chevy Impala. Cops have tried to trace, but have never been able to identify. So this black Chevy was captured on surveillance footage. The car was travelling north on US 150 from Botland into Bardstown. The car was also captured on surveillance video very close to the Netherland home that night. And police believe that the person or persons inside that vehicle are either responsible for the murders or know who committed the murders. But they've never been able to trace the car or the driver. Now, there have been speculative connections made between the deaths of Kathy and Samantha Netherland and that of the murder of Jason Ellis. Jason Ellis being the police officer who was shot, possibly with Nick Houck's gun, back in 2013. Now, Jason Ellis was a young father of 2 boys, a husband and a police officer for Bardstown PD. He joined the force in 2006 and just 2 years into his service, he was awarded Officer of the Year. He worked hard, really hard, and he was a stickler for the rules. You know, if someone was breaking the rules, Jason was on it. Now, Jason normally worked night shift with his canine partner, Figo, and they spent most of their time taking drugs off the streets. At the time, Jason was the only canine officer on Bardstown PD. After Jason's death, 2 new canines were introduced to the force. This imagery here from Jason's funeral breaks me. This is Figo at Jason's funeral putting his paw on the coffin. That kills me. Figo went to live with the Ellis family and became a lovely family pet. Now, working nights, Jason was able to spend a lot of time with his young sons. One of his young sons had Down syndrome, but both sons were active, happy little boys. And just hours before his death, Jason was actually coaching his son's baseball team. But this night, the early hours of May 25th, 2013, this was a shift that Figo didn't attend. He had the day off. He had the day off because Jason's canine handler truck was in the shop getting repaired. So Jason was on his own that night. I don't know whether that would have made a difference, but probably not. Jason had completed his shift. He signed off and was heading home. He was approaching the exit 34 of the Bluegrass Parkway. To come off, he was minutes away from home. And he noticed several branches on the road preventing him from driving forward. Now, whether he would have been able to get round them, I don't know, whether it would just stopped him completely in his tracks. But as a police officer, you know, he probably felt it was his duty, even if he could get round them, to get out and just remove these branches from the road. But this was a setup. Now, he manoeuvred his police car on the ramp such that no one else could come up it. And put his lights on, so, you know, hazard ahead. He exited his car, and whilst he was in the process of moving these branches, he was shot multiple times by a 12-gauge gun. And the shots came downwards onto Jason, so it would have been a shooter up on the hill. So like in the murder of Tommy Ballard 3 years later, this wasn't a shooter who come up to him and shot him in the chest. This was a series of shots from a distance. Again, this is somebody who knows how to shoot. This is not a chancer doing things for shits and giggles. No, this was a carefully manipulated scene conducted by somebody who could shoot at range. Nick, where were you? Where were you in the early hours of May 25th, 2013, asking for a friend? Minutes after these shots ringing out, 2 passers-by stopped, a woman in a Toyota Corolla and a man called Chad Monroe. Monroe exited his vehicle and noticed Jason lying on the ground. And the woman jumped into Jason's patrol car and got on the radio, and she can be heard saying, "Officer down, officer down." But sadly, you know, however quick thinking these 2 passers-by were, Jason was pronounced dead on the scene. And yet again, no suspect has ever been publicly named, and his case remains unsolved. The FBI are offering a reward of up to $50,000 for any information relating to an arrest in Jason's case. If you have any information, please contact 1-800-CALL-FBI. $50,000. Do you know something about the murder of Jason Ellis? Let's get into speculation town here. Many have speculated that the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland and the disappearance and the death of Crystal Rogers and the murder of Tommy Ballard are related in some way, and particularly all related to the death of Jason Ellis. Now, we know for sure that cops believe there's a connection between the murder of Tommy Ballard and the murder of Crystal Rogers. But can we find any for sure links that link all of these murders together? No, that's where we have to go to speculation town. But there have been many speculations that the murders of Kathy and Samantha were related to Jason's murder. This is one speculation. Jason had a son with Down syndrome. So could it be, as some have speculated, that that son was one of Kathy's students, because Kathy was a special ed teacher? But even if that were true, what would that have to do with the price of fish? What would that have to do with anything? So what? It's a small town. Kathy might know Jason Ellis's son. So what? Well, all right, join me in speculation town. In March of 2017, in an interview with WDRB, Sherry Ballard, Crystal's mother, surmised that her daughter disappeared because she'd overheard something maybe she shouldn't have, relating to the murder of Jason Ellis. She went on to say that her husband, Tommy, was never going to give up on their daughter, and he was going to push, and I think people knew that. I definitely think they're all connected. Could it be that Crystal had to disappear because she'd overheard too much about the death of Jason Ellis? I told you this was speculation town, but do you want to get deeper into the rabbit hole? Do you, Alice? All right. You want to be Alice? All right. This is from Reddit. We know all the best speculations come from Reddit, don't we? Well, get this one. I'm going to read it up. Get this one. I have no idea whether some or all of this is complete BS, but we're going to go there anyway because I find this intriguing. I don't know if or who else is or was involved, but former Bardstown police officer Nick Houck is bringing drugs into Bardstown and the surrounding area for a major drug organisation. I don't know who. I do know Officer Jason Ellis was investigating Nick Houck and was murdered when he got too close. So the gun used to shoot Jason Ellis and the gun used to shoot Tommy Ballard, could they both be owned by Nick Houck? Doesn't have to be the same gun. But is Nick Houck in this swirling vortex of speculation? Because Jason Ellis was the only dog handler in Bardstown at the time, but he was also the major narcotics officer at the time. Nick Houck and Jason Ellis worked together. Jason Ellis didn't like rule breakers. He wouldn't let that go for a fellow officer. Could it be possible that he was going to blow the lid on some kind of Houck-led organised crime? Doesn't explain why Kathy and Samantha Netherland were murdered. And they were murdered in a very different way. They weren't shot at a distance. They were tortured. And I'm not really sure that I buy the gang initiation idea, but did Kathy know stuff? Did Kathy hear stuff? Was Kathy... I don't know. I don't really know how I can, at this moment in time, square Kathy and Samantha's murder into this. But I could certainly see how Jason Ellis and Nick Houck could be related. I mean, look. Somebody had to know that Jason Ellis was going to pass by that ramp at that time, at that precise time, to put those branches there. That was a trap, especially for Jason. Not for some random person. This was especially for Jason. That has to be someone connected to Jason's job, doesn't it?
Okay, so just last week, end of last week, we get this big development in Crystal's case. An arrest has been made. How does that feel for you guys when you see a big development in Crystal's case?
I still think for us it's reassurance that they are working the cases. It's reassurance that they still care. It's reassurance to know that they're not being forgotten. But I think it's hope for the other cases because it's saying that they're working it. And so I think it definitely gives us hope. However, it is hard not to be disappointed when it's not your family member, because there's 5 unsolved cases. At the end of the day, it's not just Crystal, Tommy, Jason, it's all 5 of them that are unsolved in that town. So hopefully traction on another case could be traction on our own cases.
And do you feel like it is? Do you feel like an arrest in Crystal's case is bringing you closer to some movement in Jason's?
I think it's hard for us because there hasn't been a lot of new information on Jason's case from the very beginning. We've kind of been at a standstill from the beginning. And so for us, there's a possibility that the cases are connected. And so for us, that makes us very hopeful that if they can make traction on one, that it'll bring answers for others. But then also it could not be connected. And then where does that leave us when there's not been any new information on Jason's case? So for us, it does, like Lacey said, makes us extremely hopeful that answers in one case will bring answers in another case. But then too, it's hard to open yourself up again to know we might be right back where we started.
Officer Ellis was shot and killed at the exit off Bluegrass Parkway near Bardstown. He was shot from in front by someone he knew, a fellow police officer, Nick Houck. Now, this is what this Reddit poster is saying, not me. Nick's family's farm is less than a mile from the off-ramp Officer Ellis was shot at. He escaped on foot, which is why the roadblocks didn't stop him. 2 years later, Nick and his brother Brooks, who was also in on the drug smuggling, killed Brooks's then-girlfriend Crystal Rogers, who uncovered information on the drugs and the murder of Officer Jason Ellis. So this is what Sherry Ballard's been speculating. She confided in a friend that if she were ever to go missing or turn up dead, that she had a manila envelope with evidence against Brooks. Where's that envelope? It's never been found. The whereabouts of Crystal's body, still unknown, except to those who murdered her and who disposed of her body. They are charging Brooks, and this is a no-body homicide. But usually they'll wait for a body, but they've waited 8 years. I think they've got enough. A year later, Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, who had been at the forefront of the search for Crystal and the investigation into her disappearance, was shot and killed near his son's house while hunting with his grandson. A short time prior to this, Tommy was searching near one of Brooks Houck's properties. Tommy was killed by Nick Houck in retaliation for trespassing onto a property that was most likely used to hide Crystal's body or evidence of her murder before it could be destroyed. Nick Houck parked his car on the Bluegrass Parkway behind Tommy's son's house and shot him from the woods between the Bluegrass Parkway and the clearing where Tommy was when he was shot. He then got back into his car and fled the scene. I personally went and searched the area where Tommy was shot and found the tree Nick used to stabilise his shot and saw the marks left behind by the gunpowder and recoil. Now, look, again, this is speculation town. We are deep down the rabbit hole here. We've all become Alice at this point. I'm not saying that Nick Houck was the shooter of either Jason Ellis or Tommy Ballard. But what the prosecutor of Brooks Houck is saying is that maybe, just maybe, Tommy was shot with Nick Houck's gun. That's as far as we can go unless we want to stay down that rabbit hole and keep digging, right? We're going to be digging and digging and digging into this. Are there any answers at this moment in time as to what happened to Tommy Ballard, what happened to Jason Ellis, possibly? What happened to Kathy and Samantha Netherland, though, is beyond me at this moment in time. I'm not buying the gang initiation, but did they know something? Did either Kathy or Samantha know something, hear something, was going to say something? Something caused the murder, the torture of these two women. And this is the murder of all of the 5 in Bardstown over the last decade that confuses me the most. I can't help thinking that somewhere, somehow, the Houcks are involved in all of them. I don't know, you guys. Let me know what you think about the Bardstown murders. Are they all connected, do you think? Is the only evil in Bardstown called Houck, or is there more evil that's yet to be uncovered? Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Bye, guys.